Hello, students. Today we are going to discuss another important 20th century critic, I. Richards. I. Richards, who is also considered among the new critics, has approached the language of literature from different aspects, and he has found out the different uses of language. In your syllabus, again you are having three essays from I. Richards. The first one is from Principles of Literary Criticism, where he is discussing about the two uses of language, referential and emotive. Today we are going to discuss this particular essay. So here he is beginning by telling that there are two totally distinct uses of language. But because the theory of language is the most neglected of all studies, they are in fact hardly ever distinguished. So, he is telling right from the beginning that there are two distinct uses of language. And he is elaborating that by telling that it is unfortunate but not surprising that most of the psychological terms which he naturally employ tend to blur the distinction knowledge, belief, assertion, thought, and understanding. That means he is telling we use many words without properly knowing the differences between them. Sometimes we are taught that they are similar words, they can be replaced, they are replaceable. But Richards is telling that these are not replaceable. Why? Because there are certain distinctions in their usages. When we have certain distinction in the usages, something is not voluntarily or automatically replaceable. Then in the next page, he is telling fictions, whether aroused by state by analogous things in other arts, may be used in many ways. They may be used, for example, to deceive, but this is not a characteristic use in poetry. So he is telling that in the fictions, there are statements. The statements are written by the writer and they can be analogous with other art forms where certain things are expressed in the manner of a statement. But he is telling in these type of statements we find the deception. That means suppose a novel or a story you are going through, and in the story you will find the narrator has written, it is a bright morning and the protagonist has come out of his bed thinking that it will be a good day for him. But it may be deceptive because it is a statement only. It doesn't bring out the inner feelings, the inner thoughts in the protagonist, what the protagonist thinks and what is the morning. They may be different. But he is telling this is not a characteristic of use in poetry, but poetry doesn't give such type of statements. Poetry is not deceptive. If you can remember the accusation of Stephen Goshen, poetry is deceptive. But I. Richards is telling from language point of view, poetry can never be deceptive. Why? Because poetry doesn't go by the outer presentation. It brings out the emotive or the emotion. Therefore, poetry is not deceptive, but fiction can be deceptive. So he is telling that a statement may be used for the sake of the reference, true or false, which it causes. This is the scientific use of language. You mark it. That what is scientific use of language? The scientific language is a statement which can be used for the sake of reference. We can refer. We do not write it or we do not put it there to go through the mental condition or the inner condition of a character or the situation. But it may be used for the sake of the effects in the emotion and attitude produced by the reference it occasions. This is the emotive use of language. So, first one is the scientific use of language, and the second one is the emotive use of language, where the language is used for the sake of effects in emotion and attitude produced by the reference it occasions. I am giving you the example for better understanding of the difference between scientific and emotive language. Suppose the writer is writing, it is a brilliant sunshine, everything is clear, and it looks everything is normal, and there is stability in the atmosphere. So, here what happens? It is for the reference. It is referring to the sunlight, to the morning, that everything is stable, everything is normal. But it is not bringing out anything from within the society. But if the next part of that writing will say that though it is morning, but people in their beds are very much apprehensive about the lockdown and the coronavirus. So, what happens? The language is using the emotion, it is referring to the effects of emotion and attitude. People are apprehensive, people are not coming out of their bed, though the morning is so bright. So, a bright morning doesn't exactly mean here that it is a normal day, it is a stable time. So, in this way, Richards is differentiating the two uses of language, the scientific use of language and the emotive use of language. Then he is elaborating, we may either use words for the sake of the reference they promote, or we may use them for the sake of the attitudes and emotions which ensue. So, the words can be used for sake of reference or for the sake of attitude and emotions. Yet it is still the attitudes, not the references, which are important. It matters not at all in such cases whether the references are true or false. Their sole function is to bring about and support the attitudes which are the further response. But then Richards is telling, in between the two uses of language, the emotive use of language is superior, or it is the essential goal of language. Why? Because the attitudes, not the references, which are important. That is the declaration of Richards. And he is telling that the sole function is to bring about the support and support the attitudes which are for the response. Attitude is the response. Emotion is the response. So the language has to support it. The language have to bring about it. And in between these two, the emotive use of language is superior. And he is quoting from Aristotle by telling, better a plausible impossibility than an improbable possibility. So Aristotle also told that in a plausible impossibility, plausible means which will be very distantly possible. It is not immediately possible, but may be possible. Impossibility. So this is an emotion. Suppose a character is thinking that in one of the poems the poet is writing, I can cross the seven seas to meet you there. So somebody crossing the seven seas when aeroplanes were not invented, or the ships in the sea were not that big and fast, was an impossibility, but plausible impossibility. But that was not the attitude of the poet. The poet was not focusing on how to cross the seven seas, but his focus was to meet with his beloved who is there beyond the seven seas. And improbable possibility. Another is improbable possibility. The possibility is there, but which is improbable. That is the scientific use. The possibility. Science has the possibility. One day or other, the medicine of this virus will be found. The scientists are researching and the medicine will be found. So that is a possibility, but improbable at this moment. When a patient is dying, if we tell him, don't worry, we are researching and we are going to find the medicine, the patient will not be happy, the patient will not be hopeful, the patient will die. But if the same thing will be told with the plausible impossibility that you may die today, but you are creating the way for research which will help your child recovering from this disease, the man will die happily. So that is the difference between poetic use and the scientific use of the language. Then, in the last paragraph of page 32, poetry affords the clearest examples of this subordination of a reference to attitude. So, Richards is convinced that poetry is an example where attitude is subordinating reference. So, reference is subordinated. Emotion is subordinating the reference. It is the supreme form of emotive language. Poetry is the supreme form of emotive language, but there can be no doubt that originally all language was emotive. Its scientific use is a later development. Sometimes short questions can be asked. So, I.A. Richards believed that basically languages began with emotive object or objectivity. They are basically emotive. But languages were later on used from the scientific point of view, and in spite of that, language is still basically emotive. The emotions and attitudes resulting from a statement used emotively need not be directed towards anything to which the statement refers. This is clearly evident in dramatic poetry. but much more poetry than is usually supposed is dramatic in structure. As a rule, a statement in poetry arouses attitudes much more wide and general in direction. So he is elaborating by telling that emotion and attitudes from a statement used in emotive manner. Suppose in a drama or in any dramatic poetry, you will find, for example, we can take Shakespeare's Hamlet, where Hamlet is telling his beloved that you go to nunnery, or he is telling my love is more than 30,000 40,000 brothers. So here what happens, you may take it as a statement, but it is not directed as a statement only. When he is telling his beloved you go to the nunnery, that means the beloved is telling Hamlet, why don't you love me? He's telling you go to the nunnery, be a nun. But is it the objective of Hamlet? No. Hamlet is rather trying to express his disturbed mind. He is disturbed by the contemporary trouble in his family, where his beloved's father is a character. So, in this way, Church is telling that the emotively need the statement used in poetry or dramatic poetry are necessarily not directed towards what the statement refers. And in the next paragraph, he is talking about the ideas, as they are commonly called, arise. A boy's idea of friendship or of summer or of his country is not, though the name would seem to imply it, primarily an intellectual affair. It is rather an attitude or set of attitudes. That means Richards is telling that emotive use of language doesn't mean that language should be used only emotionally. It can be used in intellectual manner, in a rational manner, but whose end is emotion. Take for example, he is giving the example of a boy. I am also giving the example of a boy. Suppose a school boy, he is being served the food along with his family by his mother, and by any mistake his mother has not served him one of the items. And when the mother is asking everyone, how is the taste of this particular curry or item, the boy is telling, I should not be served this, or this item is not suitable for my health. So here what happens, that when the boy is telling that this item is not suitable for my health, it is a statement, but it is not a scientific statement simply giving a fact. It is giving an emotion. There is too much emotion within the boy because he has not been served. So he is expressing his allegation, but in an intellectual manner. So Richards is telling that even the intellectual references can be emotive. Then he is telling about bad literature. At present, bad literature, bad art, and cinema, etc., are an influence of the first importance in fixing immature and actually inapplicable attitudes to most things. He's telling what is bad literature, what is bad art, what is bad cinema. Actually, they are bad because they are they are immature in applying attitudes to most things. They do not appropriately apply the attitudes within them, either through dialogues or through other references. The proper attitude or the emotive purpose of the dialogue is not used. Therefore, we say it is a bad cinema, it is a bad art. Or you may argue, no, sir, sometimes even the story is not good, the story is very horridly present. So, one thing you remember, the story is never bad, the plot is never bad, it is the language. As a linguist, Richards is emphasizing on the use of language. He's telling that it is the use of language which makes a bad cinema, which makes a bad art, etc. Through them, the average adult is worse, not better, adjusted to the possibilities of his existence than the child. He is even in the most important thing functionally unable to face facts. Do what he will, he is only able to face fictions. Fictions projected by his own stock responses. And he is telling another reason of a bad art or a bad cinema is the use of stock response in the language. Stock response means the conventional language which we repeatedly use in our daily life. For example, I am giving you one you take from our social responses or interactions. Many times we say, what I know, moi ki janu, what I know. So suppose this is a stock response. So suppose in a drama or in a cinema, this particular response is used many times, many times. What will happen? Ultimately, you will find that the cinema or the drama is not enjoyable. Sometimes you also know that students also make caricature of their teachers or a particular speaker. The speaker is talking, and from time to time, the speaker is using I mean, I mean, I mean. So, what happens? Even though the speaker is speaking a very engaged topic in very interesting manner, but because he is repeating this I mean, ultimately you are distracted and you will find that this is a bad delivery. So he is telling that stock response is another defect in proper use of language in art or literature. Then he is telling that best sellers in all the arts, exemplifying as they do the most general level of attitude development, are worthy of very close study. No theory of criticism is satisfactory which is not able to explain their wide appeal and to give clear reasons why those who disdain them are not necessarily snobs. So he is telling good criticism should take note of these matters, as they have to explain the wide appeal of literature or literary language to their readers. If they fail to explain the wide range of use in language, then the critical appreciation or the critical study of literature will fail to do justice. So, in this way, Richards is elaborating about the two uses of language. That I. Richards, one of the new critics in 20th century, he was the first one among the critics to draw our attention to the relevance of textual study by considering the technical dimensions of language for the purpose of literary appreciation. So, already we have seen that he has distinguished the use of language into the scientific and the literary usages. So, in the second essay, The Philosophy of Rhetoric, he is of the opinion that every language that is used for the purpose of literature to depict the attitudes is more metaphoric. So he is telling that thought is metaphoric and proceeds by comparison, and the metaphors of language derives therefrom. To improve the theory of metaphor, we must remember this, and the method is to take more note of the skill in thought which we possess and are intermittently aware of already. So, in this way, he is stressing that language is generally metaphoric, and within the language, the metaphors they decide or they derive the objective of meaning and the aspects of meaning, and he is telling to take the note of that we have to note at the skill in thought that we are possessing, and we are also aware of it at every moment. So he is telling our purpose as a critic when we are appreciating literature is to find out that how this skill in thought is transformed into discussable science, or how it is transformed into certain references, and that brings out the real evaluation of a literary text. And then he's telling in page 36, let me call them the tenor and the vehicle. That means he is telling that according to Dr. Johnson, the two ideas that any metaphor is having are called tenor and vehicle. It was not Dr. Johnson who called them tenor and vehicle, but he is calling it tenor and vehicle, though Dr. Johnson identified two ideas within the metaphor. And he is telling that the two halves of a metaphor, that means the tenor and the vehicle, in spite of the immense convenience, almost the necessity of storms, if we are to make any analysis without confusion. So he is telling that it is not so easy to immediately find out the two halves of the metaphor, but still it will create a convenience for us that we will be able to the two parts of the metaphor, that is tenor and the vehicle. So how he has distinguished them? He is telling that the original idea and the borrowed one, what is really being said or thought of and what is compared to. So tenor is the original idea and vehicle is the borrowed one, and tenor is what is being thought of or said, and vehicle is what is compared of within the metaphor. So the tenor can also be said as the underlying idea, and the vehicle is the imagined nature. The tenor is the principal subject and vehicle is what it resembles. Tenor is the meaning and the metaphor, or the idea and its image. So in this way he is giving so many characteristics of tenor and vehicle. So now you remember what are the ideas associated with tenor. The ideas associated with tenor are: it is original idea, number 1. Number 2, it is really being said or thought of. Number 3, it is the underlying idea. And number 4, it is the principal subject. And tenor is, number 1, the borrowed one. Number 2, it is the comparison. Number 3, it is of imagined nature. And number 4, what it resembles. So in this way he is distinguishing between tenor and vehicle. Then in page 37 he is talking, a modern theory would object first that in many of the most important uses of metaphor, the co-presence of the vehicle and tenor results in a meaning which is not attainable without their interaction. But he is telling that the modern theory may object that why we should divide the metaphor into tenor and vehicle, because both are inseparable in their suggestiveness, in their mutuality of suggestiveness. Without their mutuality, without their interaction, the suggestiveness or the meaning will not come out. And he is telling that the modern theory would go on to point out that with different metaphor, the relative importance of the contribution of the vehicle and tenor to the resultant meaning varies immensely. So, the modern theory also says that the relative importance of the contribution of a vehicle and tenor to its resultant meaning may vary. That means they are not both contributing equally, they may be contributing unequally. And he is giving some examples, you can read it. And in this essay he is telling that we like them both is in one sense a common property that two things share, though we may at the same time be willing to admit that they are utterly different. If we cannot distinguish tenor from vehicle, then we may provisionally take the word to be literal. So he is telling the duty of a critic is to distinguish between the tenor and vehicle. Otherwise, that will be if there is no difference in their suggestiveness, then the language can be literal. We can distinguish at least uses, then we have metaphor. So if the language is to be metaphorical, then there should be the difference between tenor and vehicle. So in this way, I. Richards classifies the difference between tenor and vehicle, and you can look at the example that I am giving you. Suppose Robert Burns' poem, this I always almost refer. Oh, my love is a red, red rose. So here, my love, it is the metaphor. And my love, uh, my love is a red, red rose. This complete line is a metaphor where my love is the tenor. It is the original idea, my love. And the rose is the vehicle. It is the suggestive idea or the latter idea that is coming from the comparison. My love is compared with rose. Or you can take the example of the man's heart is like a stone. So here, what is the tenor? The tenor is man's heart. It is the main thing, it is the chief idea of the writer. And man's heart is like a stone. So stone is the comparable or the vehicle which carries the meaning. So in this way, the tenor and the vehicle is being distinguished by I. Richards. Okay, now we will be discussing about the next essay of Richard, Science and Poetry. And here he is bringing out two more ideas, statement and pseudo statement. At the beginning, he is telling words work in the poem in two main as sensory stimuli and the symbols. And he is telling that uh, a pseudo statement, it admits the distinguish between scientific statement where truth is ultimately a matter of verification, as this is understood in the laboratory, and emotive utterance where truth is primarily acceptability by some attitude, and more remotely is the acceptability of this attitude itself. That in his first essay, he told you about the scientific statement and emotive utterance. So he is telling that when we distinguish between the scientific statement where the truth is ultimately a matter of verification, because it is scientific, rational, so truth can be verified. When you say that uh, man is ambitious, so whether man is ambitious or not, it can be verified. But when we take that emotive utterance where we say man is mortal, and here you may say, sir, it is scientific. Man is mortal or not, it can be verified. Yes, that is verified. But what is there to verify? It is an universal truth. And here The truth is primarily acceptable by some attitude. When the poet or the writer uses the word, the expression that man is mortal, what is the attitude? Why the poet or the writer is telling that, in spite of knowing that this is the universal truth, it expresses an attitude. That means it may be a frustration, it may be something to do with the self consolation. So, in this way, he is telling that pseudo statement mm, can distinguish between these two aspects. And then he is telling, is page number 40, the poetic approach evidently limits the framework of possible consequences into which the pseudo statement is taken. So, poetic approach brings out a possible consequence. That means it is possible, but it may differ. But for the scientific approach, this framework is unlimited. But for scientific framework approach, this is unlimited, means it is absolute truth. In page 41, he is coming directly to what is a pseudo statement and what is a statement. He is telling a pseudo statement is a form of words which is justified entirely by its effects in releasing or organizing our impulses and attitude. So, pseudo statement is a form of words or an arrangement of words which justifies through its effect the impulses and attitudes of the speaker or the writer. It exactly doesn't convey in a literal sense, the meaning, but in a very suggestive manner. And what? The impulses and attitudes. What are the impulses and attitudes in the speaker or the writer? For example, we can say that, oh, you come, I will definitely meet you. So, then, if it is a statement, what will happen? I am telling you, okay, you come, I'll definitely meet you. This is the meaning, this is the direct meaning, which is justified by its truth. It is a statement. But if there are certain impulses or attitudes, oh, you come, I'll definitely meet you. That means I have some grudges within me against you, or I may have some frustrations relating to the relationship between you and me. So I will definitely meet you. Means how I will meet you, the victim only knows. You may know that sir is very angry. I have not responded to his invitations several times. So the next time if I go, I will be simply given a dressing. I will be chided. I will be just scolded, admonished by the teacher. So this is a pseudo statement. So he is telling a pseudo statement is a form of words which is justified entirely by its effect in releasing or organizing our impulses and attitudes. But in contrast to that, a statement on the other hand is justified by its truth, its correspondence in a highly technical with the fact to which it points. But statement is direct, is literal in justifying its truth, and it is pointing out towards the arrangement in a very straightforward manner. And finally, he is telling in page 43, pseudo statements to which we attach no belief and statements proper, such as science provides, cannot conflict. So, pseudo statement with pseudo statement, we attach no belief. There is no belief. Why? Because it is the impulse, it is the attitude that the moment I said that you come, I will definitely meet you. So, any of your friends cannot say, oh no, you go. Sir is a very nice man, so he will be giving you a good welcome. It cannot be attached because you only know that how much you have enraged the teacher or how much you have made the teacher frustrated. So, no one else can give a belief about that. And statement proper, such as science provides, cannot conflict. And in a statement, it is, if it is a proper statement, there is no conflict in the meaning because it is straightforward, it is qualified by the truth attached to it, therefore it is a statement. So these are the simple ideas given by Richards, and all these ideas may be asked for 5 marks. There cannot be, I don't think there will be any 10-mark question, but 5 marks, or maybe question for 1 or 2 marks. So it is not a very great thing, but only you have to be very clear about these ideas: statement and pseudo statement, or tenor and vehicle, scientific use of language, and literary language, etc.